Subscribe to Storylab. Now, let's begin. The late afternoon sun filtered through the blinds of Gordon Buchanan's study, casting stripes across the mahogany desk where he sat reviewing architectural plans for a veterans community center. At 62, retirement had been kind to him, quieter than his 38 years in the Army, but purposeful. The 4 stars he'd once worn seemed like relics from another lifetime, locked away in a display case his late wife Evelyn had commissioned before the cancer took her 3 years ago. His phone shattered the silence. The screen showed St. Michael's Hospital. "Mr. Buchanan? This is Dr. Patel from St. Michael's Emergency. Your son Cody was admitted an hour ago. You should come immediately." Gordon's hands remained steady as he grabbed his keys, but his mind raced through possibilities. Cody was 24, healthy, worked as a software engineer for a civilian defense contractor. Car accident? Random violence? The 15-minute drive took 9. The emergency room smelled of antiseptic and fear. Gordon found his son in a curtained bay, face swollen purple and black, left arm in a sling, bandages across his ribs. Cody's eyes, Evelyn's eyes, locked onto his father's, and Gordon saw something worse than pain. He saw humiliation and rage. "Dad." Cody's voice cracked. It wasn't random. Gordon pulled a chair close, keeping his voice level. "Tell me." The story came out in fragments. 3 days ago, 2 soldiers in uniform had appeared at Cody's apartment. They'd shown military IDs, genuine ones, and said General Willard Steele wanted to meet regarding a classified project. Cody had assumed it was legitimate consultation work through his company. "They drove me to Fort Harrison. Took me to some building in the back of the base. Looked like it hadn't been used in years." Cody winced, shifting position. General Steele was there. He said my security clearance and software skills made me perfect for a program he was running. Deep learning systems, autonomous warfare applications. Completely off books. "You said no." Gordon knew his son. "I said I needed to run it through my company's legal department." He laughed. Cody's good hand clenched the bed rail. "Said I didn't understand. That my father's service meant I had a patriotic duty. That America needed people like me to keep her safe from enemies who don't play by rules." When I stood to leave, his men blocked the door. Gordon felt ice crystallize in his chest. The same cold calculation that had made him successful in Afghanistan and Iraq. The same focus that had earned him 4 stars. What did Steele say? He said, "Your generation thinks freedom means choice. It doesn't. You are government property by birth, son. Your father understood that." Then he nodded to the colonel with him. "Henderson, I think, and they beat me. Professional. Careful. Nothing that would show through clothes." Cody's eyes glistened. When I was on the floor, Steele crouched down and said, "You have 48 hours to report back. If you don't, we'll make this official." Wartime recruitment powers are broad, and accidents happen to people who resist service. When was this? Yesterday afternoon. I went home, tried to think. This morning, Henderson showed up at my apartment. Said time was up. I tried to run. They caught me in the parking garage. Cody's voice dropped to a whisper. "Dad, I don't know what to do. If I go to the police, it's my word against the generals. If I hide, they'll find me." Steele said you'd understand, that you knew what real service meant. Gordon stood slowly, joints protesting, mind already 3 moves ahead. Willard Steele. He'd known that name would resurface eventually. You didn't bury a rattlesnake without it eventually digging its way out. "Tell me everything you remember about the building, the people, what Steele said about his program." Cody talked for 20 minutes. Gordon recorded it on his phone, took notes, asked precise questions that made the younger Buchanan realize his father was operating on a different level now. Not the retired architect who barbecued on Sundays, but something older and more dangerous. When Cody finished, Gordon pocketed his phone. "You're going to stay with your Uncle Ray in Montana for 2 weeks. I'll make the arrangements tonight. You'll fly out tomorrow after the doctors clear you." "Dad, what are you going to do?" Gordon remembered Evelyn's funeral, Cody's eulogy about his mother teaching him that strength meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. He remembered holding Cody as a newborn at Fort Bragg, promising Evelyn he'd never let this boy grow up in a world where bullies won. "I'm going to handle it. If you go to the authorities..." "I won't." Gordon's voice carried the weight of command, the tone that had once directed divisions. Steele is right about one thing. Rules protect the powerful. But he forgot something important. He squeezed his son's shoulder gently. I taught him everything he knows about bending rules. I didn't teach him everything I know. That night, Gordon sat in his study with a bottle of bourbon he'd been saving and a locked footlocker he hadn't opened in 5 years. Inside were artifacts from another life. Medals, commendations, photographs, and a leather journal Evelyn had encouraged him to keep during deployments. He opened in March 2003. Captain Willard Steele showed promise today during tactical exercises. Sharp mind, aggressive tactics, willing to take risks others won't. Reminds me of myself at that age, for better and worse. Major Chin expressed concerns about Steele's attitude toward ROE. We'll monitor. Gordon flipped forward. July 2007. Promoted Steele to Major against Chin's recommendation. His results in Fallujah speak for themselves. 15 high-value targets eliminated, minimal friendly casualties. But his methods trouble me. He told Lieutenant Morrison that enemy civilians is redundant in insurgent territory. Had to officially reprimand him. He apologized, but his eyes were empty. Evelyn asked me last night if I'm creating a monster. I told her I'm creating a weapon. She asked what happens when weapons decide who their enemies are. Gordon poured 2 fingers of bourbon, studied a photograph from 2009. 50 officers at a Baghdad forward operating base, celebrating the promotion of then Lieutenant Colonel Steele to full colonel. Gordon stood beside him, 2 stars on his shoulders, hand on Steele's back. They looked like father and son. November 2012. Steele crossed the line. Interrogation of suspected Taliban financier in Kandahar went beyond enhanced techniques. Subject died. JAG wanted criminal charges. I made a deal. Steele accepts demotion to lieutenant colonel, takes early retirement, avoids court-martial. He looked at me like I'd betrayed him. Said, "You taught me to win at any cost. Now you're punishing me for winning." I told him there's a difference between victory and cruelty. He said, "Not in war, General. You just don't have the stomach anymore." The truth that haunts me, I did teach him. Every shortcut I took, every time I prioritized mission over morality, every time I looked away from questionable tactics because they got results, he was watching, learning. The difference is I eventually found the bottom. Steele never believed a bottom exists. Gordon closed the journal, but the story hadn't ended there. 2 years after Steele's forced retirement, Gordon had heard rumors. Steele had connections in Congress, friends in the intelligence community who valued results over ethics. In 2015, Steele was back in uniform, reinstated with full rank of colonel. By 2018, he'd made brigadier general. By 2022, major general. 2 stars, running specialized programs at Fort Harrison. Gordon had watched from retirement, told himself it wasn't his problem anymore. Steele had powerful backers now, and Gordon was just an old man growing roses and attending veteran fundraisers. Let younger officers handle the Willard Steeles of the world. Then Steele put his hands on Cody. Gordon opened his laptop, logged into forums he still had access to, private networks where retired officers traded information and favors. He posted carefully worded inquiries about Fort Harrison, about unusual recruitment, about General Steele's current operations. The first response came within an hour. Marvin Mejia, Gordon's former command sergeant major, now running a private investigation firm in Virginia. "General, good to hear from you. Bad news about your target. Been hearing things. 3 potential sources. Can meet in person. Same place as always?" Gordon typed his reply. "Tomorrow. 0800. More responses filtered in through the night. A JAG officer mentioned off-record that Fort Harrison had seen unusual activity, civilian consultants disappearing from records, budget discrepancies, special access programs with no oversight. A retired logistics colonel said his nephew, a programmer, had been approached by Steele's people and threatened when he refused. The kid was too scared to file a complaint. By 3 in the morning, Gordon had 12 similar stories. A pattern emerged. Steele was recruiting civilians with specialized technical skills, programmers, engineers, communications experts, and forcing them into a classified program. Those who cooperated disappeared into Fort Harrison for weeks, then emerged with NDAs and hefty payments. Those who refused faced intimidation, violence, or worse. One message made Gordon's blood run cold. From a retired Navy psychiatrist, General Buchanan, I remember your leadership fondly. Regarding General Steele, I was contracted last year to provide psychological evaluations for a program at Fort Harrison. I was given no context, just asked to assess stress tolerance and moral flexibility in candidates. The testing protocols were concerning. When I questioned the purpose, I was told it was classified. When I refused to continue, my contract was terminated, and I received a visit from military police warning me about discussing classified information. I saw 16 subjects during my 3 months. They all had the same look. Brilliant minds who'd been broken and reassembled into something compliant. I don't know what Steele is building, but it's not serving America. Gordon closed the laptop as dawn broke. He'd spent 38 years learning to read situations, identify threats, and execute solutions. The picture was clear. Willard Steele had created a private fiefdom inside Fort Harrison, running an illegal program that impressed his political backers while terrorizing civilians into compliance. He'd learned from the best how to operate in shadows, how to make his crimes look like patriotism. But Gordon had also taught Steele's weaknesses. The man's ego required recognition. He needed subordinates who feared him, superiors who praised him, and enemies who acknowledged his superiority. That need for validation, for others to witness his power, was the crack in his armor. Gordon went to his bedroom, opened a closet, and pulled out a hanging bag he'd kept pristine for formal occasions. Inside was his dress uniform, Army service blues, perfectly pressed, for silver stars gleaming on each shoulder. He hadn't worn it since Evelyn's funeral, when he'd buried his wife with full military honors and retired the next month. He laid the uniform on his bed, ran his fingers over the combat ribbons, the badges, the insignia that represented a lifetime of service. Evelyn's voice echoed in memory. You're not the weapon, Gordon. You're the man who decides when and why weapons get used. Don't ever forget which one matters more. His phone buzzed. Cody, from the hospital. Uncle Ray's expecting me. Flight's at noon. Dad, please don't do anything that'll get you hurt. He's not worth it. Gordon typed back. He's not. You are. Trust me. He showered, shaved, and began the precise ritual of dressing in his uniform. A ritual he'd performed 1,000 times, each motion automatic. But this time felt different. This time, he wasn't dressing for ceremony or duty. He was dressing for war. At 0800, Gordon walked into a diner in Arlington. Marvin Mejia sat in a back booth, 60 years old, but still carrying himself like the sergeant major who'd saved Gordon's life in Mosul. They'd served together for 15 years before Marvin retired to start his investigation firm. Marvin stood, shook Gordon's hand with a grip that could crush stone. Sir, it's been too long. Marvin, thank you for meeting. They ordered coffee. Gordon laid out everything. Cody's beating, the recruitment attempt, the pattern of abuse. Marvin listened without interrupting, a skill that made him exceptional at intelligence gathering. When Gordon finished, Marvin pulled out a tablet. I've been tracking Steele for 6 months on another matter. Tech CEO in Seattle hired me when his daughter disappeared for 3 weeks, came back changed. She'd signed an NDA, wouldn't talk, but she gave me enough to connect it to Fort Harrison and Steele. He showed Gordon photographs, documents, testimony from victims' families. The evidence was damning, but legally useless. NDAs, classified program protections, and Steele's powerful backers made traditional justice impossible. He's bulletproof, sir, Marvin said quietly. Unless you have video of him murdering someone, he's untouchable through official channels. And even then, he might walk. Gordon sipped his coffee. Then we don't use official channels. What's your play? I'm going to Fort Harrison. I'm going to walk onto that base in full uniform, with my 4 stars visible. I'm going to find Steele, and I'm going to make him understand what happens when you touch my son. Marvin's expression didn't change. That's not a plan, sir. That's suicide. It's both. But here's what you're going to do while I'm playing the visible target. Gordon pulled out a flash drive. Everything I gathered last night, plus Cody's testimony, is on here. You're going to get this to someone who can act on it. Someone Steele hasn't corrupted yet. Ooh, Daryl Washington. He's the 3-star commanding Fort Harrison now. Took over 8 months ago. We served together in Afghanistan. He's clean, principled, hates officers who abuse power. He's also smart enough to know that Steele's operation is a cancer that'll eventually destroy his command. What if Washington's in on it? Then I die in Steele's office, and you take everything to the media. Gordon met his old friend's eyes, but I don't think he is. Steele's too paranoid to read in his base commander. He'd see Washington as potential threat, keep him compartmented. Marvin nodded slowly. You need backup? I need you to be ready to move fast if I succeed. Evidence package prepared, contacts at DOD ready to receive it, media outlets briefed. The moment I walk out of Steele's office, or don't, everything goes live. And if Steele kills you? Gordon smiled without warmth. Then he'll have murdered a 4-star general on a military installation. Even his backers can't cover that up. Either way, he loses. They spent 2 more hours planning. Marvin had resources Gordon lacked, surveillance equipment, encrypted communications, contacts in military intelligence who owed favors. By the time they finished, Gordon had a complete intelligence picture of Fort Harrison's layout, Steele's daily routine, and the identities of his key subordinates. As they prepared to leave, Marvin gripped Gordon's shoulder. Sir, in Mosul, you told me that the measure of a man isn't how he fights for victory. It's how he fights after victory's impossible. I remember. This is that kind of fight. Steele might win. The system might protect him. You might end up court-martialed or worse. Gordon thought of Cody's battered face, Evelyn's voice, the 16 victims the Navy psychiatrist described. Then I'll go down fighting. Some things are worth the cost. Hua, General. Hua, Sergeant Major. Gordon drove home and made arrangements for Cody's departure. His son called from the airport, voice still tight with pain. Dad, Uncle Ray said you're doing something dangerous. He wouldn't say what. Your uncle worries too much. Dad, I can live with what happened to me. I can't live with you getting hurt because of it. Gordon looked at the uniform laid out on his bed. Cody, when you were 8, you asked me why I kept going back to war. Do you remember what I said? You said some people have to stand between wolves and sheep. That you were a sheepdog. I lied. I was never sheepdog. I was just another wolf, fighting wolves. The difference was I fought for something larger than myself. Gordon's voice softened. You're what I fought for. Every deployment, every mission, every hard decision. It was so you could grow up in a world where you could choose to be something better than me. Steele took that choice from you. I'm taking it back. Silence. Then, come back safe. I'll do my best. After Cody hung up, Gordon finished dressing. He pinned each decoration carefully, checked his appearance in the mirror. The man staring back looked older than he remembered, gray hair and lines that hadn't been there a decade ago. But the eyes were the same, the eyes of someone who'd seen the worst humans could do and decided to fight anyway. He drove to Fort Harrison as the sun climbed toward noon, the base 40 minutes outside the city. He'd called ahead using old authorization codes, informed the gate he was conducting an unannounced inspection of classified programs. The codes were technically expired, but guards rarely questioned 4-star generals who acted like they belonged. Fort Harrison sprawled across 3,000 acres of Virginia woodland, a mixture of modern facilities and Cold War-era bunkers. Gordon navigated from memory and Marvin's intelligence, heading toward the southeastern quadrant where Steele's operation was supposedly housed. The guard at the main gate snapped to attention when he saw the uniform, eyes widening at the 4 stars. General, we weren't informed. That's the nature of unannounced inspections, soldier. Open a gate. Sir, yes, sir. The young private practically threw himself at the controls. Gordon drove through, feeling the weight of 2 decades dissolve as he returned to a world he'd left behind. Soldiers on the ground stopped and saluted. Some of the older NCOs did double takes, recognizing him. Word would spread fast that a 4-star was on base. Steele would know within 30 minutes. Good. Let him sweat. Gordon didn't drive straight to Steele's command building. Instead, he followed Marvin's intelligence to an old administrative complex on the base's edge, Building 47, supposedly decommissioned but showing signs of recent use. This was where Cody had been taken, where Steele ran his illegal program. He parked and walked to the entrance. A keypad lock barred the door, but Gordon had anticipated this. He pulled out a device Marvin had provided, a military-grade code breaker disguised as a smartphone. 30 seconds later, the lock clicked open. The interior was nothing like a decommissioned building. Fresh paint, modern lighting, new computer equipment. Gordon moved through the halls, taking photos with his phone. 6 offices, each with workstations set up for technical work. A common area with whiteboards covered in programming code and system architecture diagrams. A conference room with photographs of various civilians, the recruits. Gordon studied the photos. 16 faces, matching the Navy psychiatrist count. All young, brilliant looking. All with that same haunted expression in their eyes. He photographed everything, sent the images to Marvin's encrypted server. In the building's rear, he found something worse. A medical station with restraints on the examination table, 4 stands, locked cabinets of pharmaceuticals. The setup was too sophisticated for basic first aid. This was where Steele processed his recruits, breaking them down psychologically, perhaps chemically, rebuilding them into compliant tools. Gordon's jaw tightened. This wasn't just illegal recruitment. This was systematic abuse bordering on human experimentation. "Can I help you, General?" Gordon turned. A colonel stood in the doorway, tall, athletic, late 30s, eyes cold and evaluating. The nameplate read Henderson, Cody's attacker. "Colonel." Gordon's voice carried Arctic chill. "This is a restricted area. What's your authorization for being here?" Henderson's expression flickered with confusion. Officers didn't challenge other officers on their own base without cause. "I'm assigned to General Steele's Special Programs Unit, sir. I have clearance for all facilities in this sector. Show me your authorization papers." "Sir, I don't have them with me." "Then you're trespassing in a classified facility, Colonel. I'm conducting an unannounced security audit. You just failed it." Gordon stepped closer, reading Henderson's micro-expressions. The man wasn't used to being challenged, wasn't expecting resistance. "What's the purpose of this medical station?" "That's classified, General. I have 6 levels of security clearance above yours, Colonel. Either explain this facility's purpose, or I'll assume you're running an unauthorized operation and recommend your immediate court-martial." Henderson's hand moved subtly toward his sidearm. Gordon noticed, didn't react visibly, but shifted his weight into a defensive stance, muscle memory from decades of combat training. "Sir, with respect, I need to contact General Steele before discussing program specifics." "Do that. Tell him General Gordon Buchanan is here. Tell him I'm inspecting every inch of his operation. And tell him that if he's smart, he'll meet me in his office in the next 20 minutes. Gordon's voice dropped to something dangerous. "And Colonel, the young man you and your general beat yesterday? That was my son." Henderson's face went white. "Sir, I was following orders." Following orders stopped being an excuse at Nuremberg. You're a colonel in the United States Army. You should know better than to torture civilians on American soil. Gordon leaned in, voice low enough that only Henderson could hear. "You're going to have a choice soon, Colonel. You can go down with Steele, or you can testify against him. Think very carefully about which option serves your future better." He walked past Henderson, back toward his car. Behind him, he heard the colonel frantically making phone calls. Gordon drove to the base's administration complex, a modern 3-story structure housing command offices. More soldiers saluted as he entered. A young captain at the reception desk jumped to attention. "General Buchanan, sir. We weren't expecting. I need to see General Washington immediately." "Sir, General Washington is in a conference." Then interrupted. "Tell him it's urgent and classified." The captain hesitated, then picked up a phone. 2 minutes later, Gordon was escorted to a 3rd-floor office. Darrell Washington stood behind his desk, 3 stars gleaming, confusion and concern warring on his face. He was 54, graying at the temples, with the careful posture of an officer who'd learned early that every action was scrutinized. "Gordon? What the hell are you doing here in uniform?" "Close the door, Darrell." Washington did, then gestured to a chair. Gordon remained standing. I'm here because your base has a cancer, and it's time to cut it out. For the next 15 minutes, Gordon laid out everything. Cody's attack, Steele's illegal program, the evidence Marvin had gathered. He showed Washington photographs from Building 47, testimonies from victims' families, documentation of the pattern of abuse. Washington's expression grew darker with each revelation. When Gordon finished, the three-star sat heavily in his chair. Jesus Christ. I knew Steele was running classified programs, but I assumed they were legitimate. He has direct authorization from the Pentagon, Gordon. His operations are compartmented above my clearance level. That authorization is being abused. Steele's not recruiting volunteers. He's press-ganging civilians and torturing them into compliance. That's not a classified program. That's a war crime. Do you have proof that will hold up? I have 16 victims who will testify if they're guaranteed protection. I have documentation of medical equipment used for psychological conditioning. I have my son's testimony about being beaten by military personnel for refusing recruitment. Gordon leaned forward. And I have you, Daryl. You're the base commander. If you report this to the Inspector General, they'll have to investigate. Steele has friends in Congress. Powerful friends who value his results. I don't care if he's friends with God. He beat my son, and he's been terrorizing civilians. That ends today. Washington was quiet for a long moment. What do you need from me? 48 hours. Don't interfere with what I'm about to do, and be ready to move when I give you the signal. Marvin Mejia will deliver a complete evidence package. You file it with the IG, simultaneously brief your chain of command, and put Steele under arrest before his friends can intervene. What are you about to do? I'm going to visit an old student and remind him about some lessons he forgot. Washington stood. Gordon, Steele is dangerous. He's paranoid, violent, and he has loyal subordinates who will protect him. If you confront him directly, I trained him, Daryl. I know exactly how dangerous he is. That's why I'm the only one who can stop him. Gordon moved toward the door, then paused. When this is over, make sure those 16 victims get proper counseling and protection. And make sure everyone involved in Steele's operation faces justice. Not just him, but every officer who enabled this. Gordon, 48 hours, Daryl. That's all I need. Gordon left Washington's office and walked back to his car. His phone buzzed. Marvin. Package ready. Washington's aide just contacted me to arrange delivery. You sure about this, sir? Gordon typed back. Never been more sure of anything. If I don't check in by 1800, execute Plan B. Hua, General. Give him hell. Gordon drove across the base toward Steele's headquarters, a squat, ugly building that had once housed Cold War intelligence operations. The parking lot was nearly empty. Gordon parked directly in front of the entrance, in a space marked Reserve General Officer. He sat for a moment, gathering himself. This was the point of no return. Once he walked through those doors, one of two things would happen. Either Steele would be destroyed, or Gordon would be. There was no middle ground, no compromise. Men like Steele didn't accept defeat gracefully, and Gordon wasn't built for half measures. He thought of Evelyn, her hand in his during their last conversation before she died. Promise me you'll be careful who you fight, Gordon. Not because you might lose, but because every fight costs you something. Win or lose, you pay the price. I promise, love. And promise me that when you do fight, it'll be for something that matters. Not for pride or duty, but for love. Gordon got out of the car. The afternoon sun glinted off his 4 stars. Soldiers passing by stopped and stared. A major approaching the building froze mid-step, then snapped the sharpest salute Gordon had seen in years. He returned it crisply and walked through the entrance. The interior was institutional, beige walls, fluorescent lighting, the smell of stale coffee and old documents. A sergeant at the reception desk looked up, saw the stars, and nearly fell out of his chair, standing to attention. Sir, can I help you? I'm here to see General Steele. Don't call ahead. I'm expected. The sergeant looked uncertain, but didn't question a 4-star general. Second floor, sir. Office 205. Gordon climbed the stairs, each step measured and deliberate. He passed offices where junior officers worked, and each one fell silent as he walked by. Word was spreading like wildfire. There was a 4-star on base, and he was heading for Steele's office. The hallway on the second floor was quieter. Only 4 offices, and all but one had their doors open and lights off. Office 205 had lights spilling from under the door and voices inside. Steele's and Henderson's. Gordon didn't knock. He gripped the door handle, pushed it open, and stepped inside. Willard Steele sat behind his desk, 2 stars on his shoulders, coffee cup halfway to his lips. He was 52 but looked younger, lean, intense, with the predatory focus of someone who'd never learned to relax. Henderson stood beside him, face still pale from their earlier encounter. Both men froze as Gordon entered. The office was exactly what Gordon expected. Awards and commendations covering the walls, photographs of Steele with politicians and defense contractors, a display case with weapons and flags from various deployments. Everything designed to project power and legitimacy. Gordon closed the door behind him and locked it. The sound of the lock clicking into place was very loud in the sudden silence. Steele set his coffee cup down carefully. General Buchanan, this is unexpected, is it? Gordon walked further into the room, hands clasped behind his back in parade rest. Your colonel just told me about a young man you recruited yesterday. Recruited by beating him half to death and threatening him with imprisonment. Does that sound familiar, Willard? Steele's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. I don't know what you've been told, but you're interfering with a classified operation. Whatever personal grievances you have. The young man you beat was my son. Silence. Henderson took a step back. Steele's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I see. Steele leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Gordon, I understand you're upset, but this is larger than family matters. What we're doing here is vital to national security. Your son has skills we need for. Stop talking. Something in Gordon's voice made even Steele pause. Gordon had used that tone perhaps 5 times in his entire career. The voice that preceded extreme violence or life-altering decisions. You're going to listen very carefully to what I say next, Willard, because your life depends on understanding it completely. Gordon took another step forward. 20 years ago, I was your commanding officer. I taught you everything you know about tactics, strategy, leadership, and operating in moral gray zones. I also tried to teach you restraint, honor, and the difference between necessary evil and unnecessary cruelty. You learned the first lessons. You ignored the second. Gordon, you're retired. You have no authority. I have the authority of 4 stars, 38 years of service, and the fact that I trained most of the officers who will investigate what happens in this room. Gordon's voice remained level, almost conversational. I also have the authority of a father whose son was tortured by a man he once considered a protege. So yes, Willard, I have authority. Steele stood slowly. You can't do anything to me. I have authorization from the highest levels. My programs deliver results. The people I recruit are American citizens being kidnapped and brainwashed by a military officer with delusions of patriotism. Gordon cut him off. You're not running a classified program, Willard. You're running a criminal enterprise. The only question is whether you face justice through military courts or civilian ones. Henderson moved toward the door. Gordon's gaze snapped to him. Colonel, if you touch that lock, I will put you through that wall. Stand down. Henderson froze. Steele smiled, a thin, cruel expression. You're bluffing, Gordon. You always were more bark than bite. That's why I eventually surpassed you. I was willing to do what was necessary. You mean like torturing my son? I mean like understanding that America needs warriors, not philosophers. You spent too much time worrying about rules and ethics while our enemies laughed at us. I get results. I protect this country by any means necessary. By beating civilians and press-ganging them into service. By recognizing that in a total war, there are no civilians, only assets and threats. Steele's voice rose slightly, revealing the fanatic underneath the professional veneer. Your generation lost Vietnam and tied our hands in Iraq because you were afraid of being too harsh. My generation understands that victory requires sacrifice, sometimes from people who don't volunteer for it. Gordon nodded slowly. There it is. The real Willard Steele. Not the patriot. not the visionary. Just another bully who found a flag to hide behind. Steele's face flushed. I am protecting this nation. You're serving yourself. You always have been. Every mission, every operation, every atrocity you justified, it was never about America. It was about proving you were willing to go further than anyone else. That you were harder, colder, more ruthless. Gordon's voice dropped to something dangerous. But here's what you forgot, Willard. Being ruthless doesn't make you strong. It makes you predictable. And predictable men are easy to destroy. Get out of my office. No. Steele glanced at Henderson, who looked torn between loyalty and self-preservation. Colonel, remove this man from the building. Henderson didn't move. Colonel, that's an order. Sir. Henderson's voice wavered. General Buchanan outranks you. He outranks both of us. He's retired. His rank means nothing here. Gordon smiled without warmth. Actually, retired generals retain their rank and are subject to recall during national emergencies. Enforced recruitment of civilians by rogue military officers definitely qualifies as an emergency. He pulled out his phone, showing the evidence photos from Building 47. I've also documented your entire operation. The medical station, the restraints, the drugs. The 16 victims you've processed. All of it is already in the hands of the Inspector General, the base commander, and several military prosecutors. Steele's face went pale. You're lying. Am I? Call General Washington. Ask him if he just received a classified evidence package from Marvin Mejia. Gordon pocketed his phone. You're finished, Willard. The only question now is whether you surrender quietly or make this messy. Court-martial is too good for you, but it's what you're going to get. For a long moment, no one moved. The office felt suspended in time. 3 men in uniform facing a moment that would define the rest of their lives. Then Steele lunged. His combat training hadn't atrophied despite years behind a desk. He moved fast, going for Gordon's throat with trained efficiency. Henderson shouted something, moving to intervene. But Gordon was faster. He'd spent 38 years in combat zones, most of it in situations where hesitation meant death. His body reacted before conscious thought, deflecting Steele's attack, redirecting momentum, using the younger man's aggression against him. Steele crashed into his own desk. Coffee spilled. Paper scattered. He spun, reaching for the sidearm at his hip. Gordon was already there, hand clamping around Steele's wrist with vice-like pressure. Don't. They stood frozen, Gordon's superior leverage and positioning controlling the situation despite being older and theoretically weaker. Years of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Krav Maga training, skills Gordon maintained even in retirement, gave him advantages Steele had forgotten Gordon possessed. Stand down, General, Gordon said quietly. Don't make me hurt you. You can't. Steele's face was red with exertion and rage. I'll destroy you, my connections. Your connections won't save you from what's coming. It's over. Henderson stood paralyzed by the door, hand on his own sidearm, but clearly uncertain whether to draw it. Gordon looked at the colonel. Henderson, you have a choice. You can go down with Steele as an accomplice to torture, kidnapping, and abuse of power. Or you can testify against him, cooperate with investigators, and possibly save your career. Choose quickly. Colonel, Steele hissed. Shoot him. That's an order. Henderson's hand trembled on his weapon. Gordon could see the calculation happening behind the man's eyes. Loyalty versus survival. Duty versus self-preservation. The colonel's hand moved away from his gun. Sir, I can't. This is wrong. All of it. You traitor. Gordon increased pressure on Steele's wrist. The joint made a small popping sound. Steele gasped in pain, his grip on the sidearm weakening. Listen to me very carefully, Willard, Gordon said, his voice cold and precise. In approximately 15 minutes, military police are going to arrive at this building. General Washington is filing charges against you right now. The evidence package includes testimony from 16 victims, photographs of your operation, and documentation of every law you've broken. Your political friends will abandon you the moment this becomes public because they can't afford association with someone who tortured American citizens on American soil. You don't understand what we're building here, the future of warfare. I understand perfectly. You're building an empire of fear because it makes you feel powerful. But empires built on fear always collapse. Always. Gordon released Steele's wrist and stepped back. You're under arrest, General. And unlike the lives you've destroyed, you'll actually get due process. Lucky you. Steele sagged against the desk, cradling his wrist. The fight drained out of him as reality set in. Henderson moved to the door, unlocked it. I'll cooperate with the investigation. Tell them everything. Smart choice, Colonel. Now go wait in the hallway. Send in the first MP you see. Henderson left quickly. Gordon and Steele faced each other across the ruined office. Former mentor and student, separated now by an unbridgeable chasm of choices and consequences. You taught me everything, Steele said bitterly. How was this different from what you did? Because I learned when to stop, Gordon replied. You never did. And that's why you're going to spend the rest of your life in a military prison while I go home to my son. The sound of boots in the hallway announced the arrival of military police. Gordon opened the door to find a team of 6 MPs, led by a captain who looked simultaneously confused and awed at finding 2 generals in this situation. Captain, Gordon said calmly, Major General Steele is under arrest for multiple violations of the UCMJ, including assault on civilians, illegal recruitment practices, and abuse of power. General Washington has filed formal charges. You're to take General Steele into custody immediately. The MP captain glanced at Steele, who stood hollow-eyed behind his desk. Sir, I'll need authorization. You have it. Call General Washington if you need confirmation, but every second you delay is a second General Steele might use to destroy evidence or contact his accomplices. Gordon's voice carried absolute command. Move, Captain. The MPs moved. Within minutes, they had Steele in handcuffs, reading him his rights. The once proud general looked shrunken, diminished, as they led him from his office. Gordon watched them go, feeling no triumph, only tired relief. The fight wasn't over. There would be investigations, hearings, possibly even attempts by Steele's backers to bury the truth. But the first battle was won. His phone buzzed. Marvin, Washington confirms arrest. Evidence package delivered. You good, sir? Gordon typed back. I'm good. Start phase 2. I want every one of Steele's accomplices identified and charged. Already on it. Your son called. Heard what happened. Says he's proud of you. Gordon felt something loosen in his chest. Tell him I'll call tonight. And Marvin? Thank you. Hoa, General. Gordon walked out of Steele's building into the late afternoon sun. Soldiers were gathering in clusters, word spreading that something major had happened. Some recognized him, pointed. The story would spread. The legendary 4-star who came out of retirement walked onto a base in full uniform and brought down a corrupt general. Let them talk. Let the story spread. Let every officer who thought they could abuse power hear what happened when they crossed the wrong line. Gordon drove to the base gate, returned the salutes of guards who now knew exactly who he was. He felt older than his years, tired from the confrontation and the weight of what he'd done. Violence, even justified violence, took something from you each time. But as he drove home, he thought of Cody recovering in Montana, of the 16 victims who could now seek justice, of the future soldiers who wouldn't be victimized by Steele's operation. Some fights were worth the cost. The next 3 weeks moved quickly. Steele's arrest triggered exactly the investigation Gordon had predicted. Initial attempts by his political backers to suppress the story failed when Marvin leaked evidence to major news outlets. The scandal exploded across military and civilian media. Rogue General's secret program tortured civilians. Gordon spent days testifying before military prosecutors, Inspector General investigators, and eventually a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. He laid out everything in meticulous detail, supported by Marvin's evidence and testimonies from Steele's 16 victims. Henderson, true to his word, cooperated fully. He provided detailed accounts of Steele's operation, identified other officers involved, and described the systematic abuse Steele had employed. In exchange for his testimony, Henderson received a reduced sentence, dishonorable discharge, and 2 years in military prison rather than the 10 he'd have faced as Steele's accomplice. 7 other officers were identified as knowing participants in Steele's program. All faced court-martial. The trials would take months, but Gordon made sure Marvin and his team tracked every case, documenting outcomes and ensuring no one escaped justice. Cody returned from Montana after 2 weeks, physically healed but mentally processing the trauma. Father and son spent evenings on Gordon's porch, talking about what happened and what it meant. "Do you regret it?" Cody asked one night. "Coming out of retirement? Risking everything?" Gordon considered the question seriously. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that men like Steele exist. But I don't regret protecting you. That's not something I could ever regret. The news keeps calling you a hero. General Washington said you saved the Army from a massive scandal. I'm not a hero, Cody. I'm just a father who refused to let someone hurt his son." Gordon sipped his bourbon. "The real heroes are those 16 victims who had the courage to testify despite their fear. They're the ones who will make sure this never happens again." What happens to Steele now? Court-martial starts next month. He's facing 15 charges, including multiple counts of assault, kidnapping, abuse of power, and violations of the UCMJ. His lawyers are trying to argue he was running a legitimate classified program, but the evidence against him is overwhelming. Gordon's voice hardened. He'll spend the rest of his life in Fort Leavenworth. No parole, no early release. Military prison for military criminals. Cody was quiet for a moment. "Henderson came to see me yesterday." Gordon turned sharply. "What?" "He showed up at my apartment. No uniform, just a broken man. He apologized. Said he knew it didn't fix anything, but he needed to say it." Cody's expression was complex. "He said you gave him a chance to do the right thing, and he wanted me to know he was grateful for that. That he wished he'd done the right thing before you forced him to." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I appreciated the apology, but that it would take a long time before I could forgive him. If ever." Cody met his father's eyes. "Was that okay?" "That was perfect. Forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone, son. It's something you give when and if you're ready." The days stretched into weeks. Gordon returned to his retirement routine. Architecture projects, veterans organizations, quiet mornings with coffee and newspapers. But something had changed. He felt more present, more purposeful. Evelyn's death had hollowed him out, made him uncertain of his place in the world. Confronting Steele had reminded him that even in retirement, even in grief, he still had something to contribute. 6 weeks after Steele's arrest, Gordon received a visitor. General Darrell Washington appeared at his door in civilian clothes, looking uncomfortable. "Darrell, didn't expect to see you. Can I come in?" They sat in Gordon's study, the same room where this had all begun. Washington looked around at the photographs, the books, the quiet dignity of a life well lived. "I came to apologize," Washington said finally. "I should have known what Steele was doing. I'm the base commander. It was my responsibility to know. You were compartmented out intentionally. Steele was smart enough to hide his operation from oversight. That's not an excuse. 12 separate anomalies in base reports should have triggered my attention. Unusual power consumption in Building 47, irregular personnel movements, missing budget allocations." Washington's jaw tightened. "I was lazy, Gordon. Comfortable in my command. I trusted that classified programs were legitimate because questioning them was harder than accepting them." Gordon poured them both bourbon. "You fixed it when you learned the truth. That's what matters. You fixed it. I just filed paperwork after you did all the hard work." Washington accepted the glass. "The Army's conducting a full review of all classified programs now. They're implementing new oversight protocols to prevent another Steele situation. Your testimony to the Senate convinced them it was necessary." "Good. There's something else." Washington pulled an envelope from his pocket. "The Secretary of the Army wanted me to give you this personally." Gordon opened it. Inside was a letter of commendation and a formal invitation to return to active duty as a special inspector for ethics and oversight in classified programs. He read it twice, then set it aside. "Tell the Secretary I'm honored, but no. I've done my part. Let younger officers handle the future." I told him you'd say that. Washington smiled slightly. "He said to tell you the offer stands permanently if you change your mind." After Washington left, Gordon sat alone in his study. He thought about power about responsibility, about the weight of 4 stars and what they represented. He'd worn that weight for 38 years, and it had cost him marriages, friendships, and pieces of his soul. But when it mattered most, those 4 stars had given him the authority to protect his son, and that made every sacrifice worthwhile. The court-martial of Major General Willard Steele began on a cold Monday in October. Gordon attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery where Steele could see him. The prosecution was thorough and ruthless, laying out years of abuse with meticulous evidence. Steele's defense tried to argue national security necessity, but crumbled under testimony from victims. One by one, the 16 people Steele had brutalized told their stories. The courtroom was silent as a young programmer described being waterboarded in Building 47's medical station. A female engineer testified about weeks of psychological torture designed to break her resistance. When Cody took the stand, Gordon watched his son describe his abduction and beating with clear, precise language. Cody didn't embellish or dramatize. He simply told the truth. And the truth was damning enough. Steele's lawyers tried to discredit the testimony, suggesting the victims were confused or exaggerating. But Marvin's evidence, photographs, documents, testimonies from Henderson and other accomplices, corroborated every detail. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The verdict took the jury 4 hours to reach. Guilty on all 15 charges. The sentencing hearing was brief. The presiding judge, a 3-star general who'd served with Gordon in Iraq, looked at Steele with undisguised contempt. Major General Steele, you have been found guilty of crimes that betray everything the United States military stands for. You tortured civilians. You abused your authority. You brought shame upon the uniform you wore and every soldier who serves honorably. The judge's voice was iron. You will be stripped of rank, dishonorably discharged, and sentenced to 45 years confinement at the United States Disciplinary Barracks, Fort Leavenworth, with no possibility of parole. Steele showed no emotion as guards led him away. But as he passed Gordon in the gallery, their eyes met. Gordon saw no remorse there, no understanding of what he'd done wrong. Just bitter resentment and the hollow certainty that he'd been betrayed by a world too weak to appreciate his vision. Outside the courthouse, Gordon stood with Cody and Marvin as reporters shouted questions. General Buchanan, how does it feel to see justice served? General, did you ever think about taking the law into your own hands? Will you return to active duty? Gordon raised a hand, and the questions died down. I'll say this once. Major General Steele's conviction isn't about revenge or justice for one family. It's about protecting every American citizen from military officers who forget they serve the people, not themselves. My son and the other victims showed tremendous courage in testifying. They're the real heroes in this story. But, General, you're the one who stopped Steele. I wore a uniform and did my job. That's all. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to take my son to dinner. They walked away from the cameras to Gordon's car. Marvin clapped him on the shoulder. Hell of a speech, sir. I meant every word. I know you did. That's why it worked. Marvin glanced at Cody. You doing okay, kid? Getting there, Cody said. Therapy helps. Knowing Steele can't hurt anyone else helps more. They drove to a quiet restaurant Gordon favored, one where the staff knew not to bother him for autographs or stories. Over steaks and beer, they talked about everything except the trial, about Cody's new job with a different company, about Marvin's growing investigation firm, about Gordon's plan to finally finish the Veterans Community Center he'd been designing. As dinner wound down, Cody raised his glass. To Dad, for teaching me that standing up to bullies is always worth it, even when it costs you something. Marvin raised his glass. To General Buchanan, best commander I ever served under, and the man who reminded us all that honor isn't a weakness. Gordon clinked glasses with both of them. To family, blood and chosen, the only thing worth fighting for. They drank, and Gordon felt something settle in his chest, a sense of completion, of cycles ending and new ones beginning. Evelyn would have been proud of how Cody had handled this ordeal. She would have been proud of Gordon too, though she'd have chided him for the violence in Steele's office. Sometimes violence is necessary. Love, he thought toward wherever she was. But you taught me to make sure it's always for the right reasons. I think I got this one right. 6 months later, Gordon stood at the dedication ceremony for the Veterans Community Center he'd designed. The building was beautiful, modern but warm, with spaces for counseling, job training, social gatherings, and medical care. It represented everything he believed about service. That it didn't end when you took off the uniform, that you cared for those who'd sacrificed alongside you. Cody stood beside him, fully healed now, new confidence in his bearing. The young man had started a nonprofit helping victims of military abuse navigate the legal system and access support services. He'd found purpose in his trauma, transformed it into something constructive. Mom would have loved this, Cody said quietly, looking at the building. She designed half of it, Gordon replied. I found her sketches in old files, ideas she'd had about what veterans really needed. I just finished what she started. The ceremony concluded with Gordon cutting a ribbon while reporters photographed and applauded. Former soldiers who'd benefit from the center shook his hand, thanked him for everything he'd done, not just the building, but the example he'd set. As the crowd dispersed, Gordon noticed a figure standing apart, a man in civilian clothes, mid-30s, watching with intense focus. The man approached hesitantly. General Buchanan? I'm Martin Tracy. I was one of Steele's victims. Number 7. Gordon shook his hand. Martin, how are you doing? Better, thanks to your son's organization. They helped me get therapy, connected me with other survivors. Martin's voice shook slightly. I wanted to thank you for stopping Steele, for making sure we weren't forgotten. You were never forgotten, Gordon said firmly. What happened to you and the others was a crime. You deserve justice, and I'm glad you got it. Can I ask you something? Of course. When you walked into that office, locked the door, were you afraid? Gordon considered the question honestly. Terrified. Not of Steele, of failing, of not being enough to stop him. But fear doesn't excuse inaction. Sometimes you have to be afraid and do the right thing anyway. Martin nodded slowly. That's what I'm learning. Thank you, General, for everything. As Martin walked away, Cody put a hand on Gordon's shoulder. Still think you're not a hero? I'm a father who protected his son. Everything else is just consequence. You protected 16 people, Dad. You reminded the military that it serves the people, not itself. You proved that even the most powerful can be held accountable. Cody's voice was firm. That's the definition of heroism. Gordon looked at his son. This good, principled young man who'd survived trauma and emerged stronger, and felt pride beyond words. This was his real legacy. Not the battles won or the enemies defeated, but the values passed down to someone who'd carry them forward. Your mother and I did something right with you, he said finally. You did a lot right, Cody replied. Now come on. Marvin's waiting to give you grief about your speech. Apparently you thanked everyone except him. They walked toward where Marvin stood with other veterans, and Gordon felt something he hadn't felt since Evelyn died. Contentment. Not happiness. That was still too far away, too much grief to process, but a sense that his life still had meaning, still had purpose. The 4 stars were back in their case at home. The uniform hung in the closet, worn now only for formal occasions. But the man who'd earned those stars, who'd served 38 years, who'd made mistakes and learned from them, who'd stood up when it mattered most, that man was still here, still fighting, still protecting, still serving, just in quieter, more personal ways. And as Gordon joined his son and friends in laughter and fellowship, surrounded by veterans whose lives had been changed by his work, he knew Evelyn was watching and smiling. The wolves could be beaten, the sheep could be protected, and even in retirement, sheepdogs still had teeth. In a small cell at Fort Leavenworth, Willard Steele sat on his bunk, staring at walls that would be his world for the next 4 decades. The military prison was harsh but fair. No special treatment for disgraced generals, no respect for rank that had been stripped away. Other prisoners knew who he was, what he'd done. Word spread fast in places like this. He'd been jumped twice in the first month, beaten with the same casual efficiency he'd once employed against civilians. The guards had intervened eventually, but not quickly. Never quickly. He'd filed complaints, demanded investigations, insisted on protective custody. The warden, a colonel who'd once served under Gordon Buchanan, had looked at him with cold eyes and said, "You wanted people to understand they were government property, General. Welcome to being property." Now Steele lay in the darkness, listening to sounds of the prison at night, and thought about Gordon Buchanan, his former mentor, his former commanding officer, the man who destroyed everything Steele had built. The worst part wasn't the imprisonment or the beatings or the loss of status. The worst part was understanding, finally, what Gordon had tried to teach him 20 years ago, that power without accountability was tyranny, that strength without compassion was cruelty, that victory without honor was just another form of defeat. Steele had believed he was strong because he was willing to do what others wouldn't. He'd thought his ruthlessness made him superior. His willingness to cross lines made him necessary. But lying in this cell, stripped of everything that had defined him, he finally understood the truth. Gordon had always been stronger. Not because he was more ruthless, but because he knew when to stop, because he served something larger than himself. And now Steele would spend the rest of his life knowing that the student had never surpassed the teacher. He'd only shown how far he could fall. In another cell, miles away in a different facility, Colonel Vince Henderson served his 2-year sentence. But unlike Steele, Henderson spent his time reading philosophy, attending therapy, writing letters of apology to his victims. He'd made a choice in Steele's office, to betray his commanding officer and save his soul. And every day since then, he'd worked to prove that choice wasn't just self-preservation. The other 7 officers convicted in the scandal faced their own reckonings. Some broke under the weight of their guilt. Some justified their actions to the end. But all of them learned the same lesson, that following orders was never an excuse, that authority without ethics was poison, and that eventually, everyone answered for their choices. Back in Virginia, in a modest house filled with photographs and memories, Gordon Buchanan slept peacefully for the first time in years. His son was safe. The guilty had been punished. The innocent had found justice. And tomorrow, he'd wake up and continue building a life worth living. A life defined not by the wars he'd fought, but by the peace he'd helped protect. The 4 stars were retired. The general was done. But the man, the father, the mentor, the guardian, was just beginning the next chapter. And that was enough.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.